Hello, hello. Welcome back to the podcast. I am so glad you're here. I know I always say that, and you know what? I always mean it every single time. Okay, well, get settled in. You are in for such a powerful episode. Today, we are kicking off a series. I briefly mentioned it at the end of last week's episode. And the series that I'm starting today, it's going to be 8 episodes. Today will be part 1. And in this series, I'm going to be sharing with you 8 practices for self care in times of injustice and rising fascism. Okay, so that is the new series. I am really just feeling so deeply called to sit and record this and share this with you. I believe that it is so deeply needed. And as we get into today, part 1 of this series, this is absolutely, we need to mention this right from the get-go, is about equipping you, empowering you, that you can take such great care of yourself, really in any season or chapter of your life. But specifically, we are going to be addressing some of what so many of us are navigating and possibly even feeling so alone in. And we're going to do it in a way that is powerful, that is empowering, and that it just equips you even more to take care of yourself as needed. So let's get started. And I want to start off by just sharing with you why I created this series. And then I'm going to walk you through the format of the series, basically what you can expect. And then we'll get started with part 1, which I'm going to be unpacking and sharing with you today. So over the past year, I have been just watching myself, observing myself deepen my self-care. And I'm going to explain more of what that means, but I'm going to just start off by sharing with you, in this last year, I have been witnessing myself deepening my self-care just at the deepest levels. And honestly, not because I wanted to, because I've had to. I have been deepening my own self-care over the last year in the face of what so many of us are witnessing, in the face of injustice, rising fascism, these illegal, inhumane ICE raids, and dehumanization of entire communities, including the immigrant community, but absolutely not only the immigrant community, also the LGBTQIA plus community, and more. There's so much happening globally and here in the US that our eyes are seeing, that our brains are processing, and that our nervous systems are responding to. I'm going to say that last line one more time. There is so much happening globally and here in the US, in the United States, that our eyes are seeing, that our brains are processing, that our nervous systems are responding to. And let me take a moment here. I want to be really clear with this. The purpose of this episode isn't to get into political debate. I am not a political expert, nor is that my focus, although I do love to study and understand systems of oppression because I do believe this is important for our empowerment and liberation as women. But with that being said, what I am an expert in and what I do have tons of expertise, training, and lived experience in is holistic self-care, specifically emotional processing, nervous system regulation, somatics, and for us as women, our relationship with our bodies, our relationship with food. And a very important part of my approach and part of what makes it truly holistic is that we don't exist in a bubble. We are humans living in the real world. And of course, whatever is happening in the world, also whatever's happening in our lives, whether that's on an individual level or on a collective level, is part of our reality. It becomes part of our lived experience because we are not living in a vacuum. And so that being said, I am not here to make a point or to prove whether or not there's injustice or whether or not there's rising fascism taking place. That is for you to decide. But what I am going to do in this series, I'm going to share with you how I've deepened my self-care, how I've actually deepened my self-care as I navigate and process so much of the injustice, rising fascism, and this current political climate without defaulting to my old coping strategies that actually were not supportive. And what I have found is that as I navigate and process so much of what my eyes are seeing, so much of what my ears are hearing, what my nervous system is responding to, what I have found is that this has required of me to deepen my self-care if I don't want to default to old, coping strategies that I know were not supportive and are not supportive. And so that's exactly what I'm going to be walking you through in this 8-part series. I'm going to be sharing with you the different aspects and actually how I've been doing that. Like, what does it actually look like as I am also being a mom, also running a business, also, what does this actually look like? How am I actually navigating and coping and processing without defaulting to my previous coping strategies, which were stress eating, emotional eating, self-sabotage, etc., if that's not what I want? And for me, it's not what I want because it's not what actually feels most supportive. As you know, especially if you've been a longtime listener of the podcast, for basically 2 decades of my life, I battled with emotional eating. And I say battled because it literally felt like a battle. I battled with emotional eating, stress eating, sabotage cycles. And back in that day, back in that time, that is how I would cope. I would cope with emotional eating. I would cope with stress eating. Food was my comfort. Food was my escape. Food was my only, at least this is how it felt. This is what felt very true at that time, that food was my only source of comfort. It was definitely my go-to. That was all I knew. And one of the first things I want to say as we get into part 1 here, this is super, super important, is that coping is not a flaw. Coping is brilliant. Coping is survival. Okay, I'm going to say this again. Repeat after me if necessary. Coping is not a flaw. Coping is brilliant. If you are coping, you are brilliant because coping is how we respond and it is how we survive. It is how we navigate things. And that's really important because that really helps set the stage for your self-care decisions to come from a loving, compassionate place versus judgment. And so coping is not the problem. We actually need to cope. There are certain situations, circumstances we need to cope. But simply how you can think about this is that we have the ability to shift our coping to ways that actually feel good and or actually are supportive. So we're talking big picture, right? They actually are supportive for you in your life with whatever it is that you're navigating. And so now, fast forward to today, fast forward to this year, I've diversified the ways that I cope. My coping feels and is intentional. My coping in situations that feel hard, that are challenging, that are highly emotional, are coping strategies. They are coping strategies and practices that actually support me in whatever it is that I'm navigating. So that is the reason why I have decided to create this series. And let me just quickly walk you through the format of the series. Here's what you can expect in this 8-part series. Remember that my purpose here is to be a support during this time. And I hope that this goes without saying, but for me, I think of myself as a leader. I think of myself as a thought leader. I do think of myself as a leader. And I strive to be a leader who stays present with our full human experience in a way that actually embodies being holistic, including times like these. And so to actually be present versus staying silent. And what you can expect, like I said, there's going to be a total of 8 episodes. In each episode, I will be centering my own examples. I'm going to be sharing with you what's real for me in my lived experience, because again, I'm sharing how my self-care has deepened and exactly what that looks like. And I'm literally sharing real examples with you. And so in each episode, I will share my own examples. And when I do that, of course, I'm going to be centering my lived experience because that's the experience that I know. And I will be inviting you to center your own experience. So as you listen to me share examples, center your own experience. And I promise you, I'm going to be reminding you of this a lot because it's super important. So I'll remind you of this in every episode because what we're living through hits differently for each person, for each of us, depending on who you are, your race, identity, culture, your lived experience. And that's intersectionality. We've talked about intersectionality before here on the podcast. And so we are always looking at things through this lens, knowing that we're all different. We all have a different intersectionality. And of course, for this reason, we all experience things differently as well. And so as you're listening, and as I'm sharing some of my examples, if you notice that what I'm sharing hasn't affected you in that way, or that doesn't feel particularly true for you, or there may be other things that feel more pressing and more present for you, just to give a couple of examples, just again, remember, I will be sharing my examples, but center your own experience. Because the purpose is not to compare your experience to mine, but in this series, I want to show and share how our self-care can look like in real life as we are navigating these very real things. So today, part 1, be kind to yourself. And give me a minute here because I know this may sound oversimplified, but I swear, I cannot state this enough. Being kind to yourself matters so much that I literally decided to make this the first episode of an 8-part series. So give me a moment. We're going to dive into this because I want to talk about what does this really mean? What does this really mean? What does this really look like? What can this really look like? And now is the part where I'm going to be getting into some real life examples. As my eyes watch masked men jumping out of unmarked vehicles, physically assaulting women, families, peaceful protesters, people just out on a walk, or on the way to the store. My eyes are seeing this, right? My eyeballs are collecting this data. This data is going into my brain. My brain is processing this information. There was this report that I saw of a teenage kid. I believe this happened somewhere in Los Angeles. I don't remember exactly where, but there's this teenage kid. He was on his way to school. And literally, this kid actually looked like my nephew. They had the same cool hair that all, the kids are into these days and everything. This kid literally looked like my nephew. So it could have literally been my nephew. In fact, the city that this happened wasn't too far actually from where my nephew lives. And in this report, ICE had approached this kid. He was on his way to school. They grabbed him, they threw him down to the ground. And I didn't see the video of that actually happening. But what I did see and hear was the video where the kid was sharing his experience, a teenager. If I remember correctly, he was either 15 or 16 years old. So what I heard and saw was the kid with his voice shaking. This kid was crying, and what he was saying is, I was just on my way to school. I didn't do anything bad. He was on his way to school. He had a soccer game that day. And then I also heard in this report, the dad also crying, saying like, I never imagined this would happen to my kid and that this would be happening in my city, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, this is just wild. Both the dad and this teenager, both American US citizens, not that even matters in my opinion, because it's all being done in a way that is illegal and inhumane regardless. But the whole point of sharing just this one example, like that is just literally one story. There's every day there's stories that I'm hearing. Sometimes there's videos that I'm seeing. And the whole point of me sharing that is, it's part of what I've been processing. I know it's part of what so many of us have been processing. But here's a big takeaway here, right? My eyes are seeing this. And I'm emphasizing this for a reason. My eyes are seeing this. My ears are hearing the stories. This information is going up to my brain. Whatever images, videos, information that your eyes are seeing and that your ears are hearing, our brain now has to process this information. And then if you have an emotional response, which of course I did, now you have to then process these emotions, whether it's heartbreak or rage or anger or whatever the emotional response is. Okay, so now your brain has to process this information. And if you are having an emotional response, which, like I said, for me, for sure I do, now you also have to process these emotions. And if you experience a nervous system response, I'll give you a couple of examples of what that might feel like. You may feel that your heart rate speeds up a little bit as you're hearing the story, or you're getting, reading a headline or watching a segment on the news, or maybe you're literally seeing something in your community. That's a nervous system response. You can also think of this as like your body is physiologically, your body is responding. That's another way you can think about this. So your heart rate speeds up, or you feel yourself having a fear response. That's another way. Like maybe you feel yourself like your muscles tense up, your shoulders maybe even go up. I actually just noticed myself take a big, exhale. And that's because sometimes we even notice ourselves like kind of holding our breath or breathing faster. And so now what that means is your nervous system is on high alert. Your nervous system now also is activated, which in some of these cases, that of course completely makes sense because our nervous system is here to help protect us. So anytime that nervous system is like getting a sniff that there is something not quite right, that's maybe dangerous, potentially dangerous, okay, nervous system job is really to help keep us safe. So nervous system is actually super brilliant. We love our nervous system. But my whole point here is like, okay, so now your nervous system's having a response, possibly. You're possibly having an emotional response. And so there's emotions to process. And your brain, even if, let's say you're not feeling an emotional response, you feel kind of neutral about whatever it is. Maybe you're not noticing yourself having a nervous system response, but even if it's simply that your brain is processing information that your eyes are seeing and your ears are hearing, that is still work that your brain and your body are doing. But I know, literally the reason I'm recording this episode and recording this whole series is because I know that so many of us are navigating these emotions and our nervous system feeling dysregulated and on high alert, and for good reason. And I know that up to this point, everything that I'm saying may feel like, oh my gosh, okay, and now what do I do? I promise you we're going to get there. But part of all of the self-care in this is also allowing ourselves the space to name the experience that we're having and to actually name that it does take some bandwidth, that our brain and our bodies and our nervous system is doing extra work, is one way we could say it. And so I'll continue to share a little bit more on this example. And remember, I'm sharing my own example, but center your experience. For me, as you know, I'm first generation Mexican American. Both of my parents immigrated to the US from Mexico way before I was born. And they both have been US citizens for a long time now. A very long time now. And yet I worry about their safety, especially my dad, because he meets all the usual stereotypes for racial profiling and all of the racial profiling that has been happening. My dad, I love this man. My dad, he is one of my best friends, and he is a short, brown man with a thick Mexican accent. And so as I'm seeing all of this, of course, I worry about my dad. I literally worry about his safety. I literally worry about his safety. And when I heard the news about the Supreme Court ruling, which actually basically okays racial profiling, Of course, that was something that I had to process. Of course, I had an emotional response. Of course, my nervous system responded and then was on high alert. Of course, that is my body doing its job. That is my brain doing its job. And so then I get to do the part of self care. And particularly in this first episode of this series, being kind to myself. And I'm going to talk more about what that looks like for me. First, I'm kind of just unpacking. Okay, like here's some of what I've been navigating and processing and coping with. And then here's exactly what it's looked like for me. And so I share with you, right? I worry about my dad. I literally worry about his safety. I also worry about my daughter's safety. My daughter, she's 6 years old. I know for some of you, you are OG listeners of the podcast. You've been listening since I was pregnant, right? So she is 6 years old now. Okay, but even at 6 years old, she's already experienced microaggressions about being a quote unquote Mexican. And don't even get me going with that because I will literally cry if I start talking about that. And so, of course, there's emotions to be processed. Of course, I have an emotional response when she shares this with me. You know, my 6-year-old baby that I want to literally protect from everything, but I know it's not possible. But of course, my nervous system may have a response and be on high alert. And so when I see these ICE raids, for example, even if it's not directly my family being literally detained, I also like think about the generational trauma that's taking place. And there's other injustices happening and taking place. There's other abuses of power. Of course, this isn't the only thing going on, unfortunately. Of course, there's so many other issues and injustices, but I share this with you because, you know, probably for obvious reasons, this is just so present and so close to home, given my own intersectionality of being a daughter of Mexican immigrants. And so as I'm processing, like I know that I went detailed there a little bit, but I could go even more detailed, right? These are just some examples, but I went a little bit detailed there to almost really honor, like, yeah, this is a lot. This is a lot. And so notice what's your version of this. Even if maybe it's one thing, but what are the emotions there for you? Has your nervous system been on high alert regarding certain things? We can honor that it is a lot. And as I'm processing these things on a daily basis, that's also on top of the regular everyday aspects of being a mom, running a business, and more. And so self-care this year has not been a quote unquote nice to have. Not that I've ever thought about it that way, but what I'm trying to say here is like self-care has been essential. It has been essential. And it's exactly why I'm sharing with you that my self-care has deepened. Like it has taken deeper roots than ever before. Because my self-care was already deeply rooted. Well, it has taken even deeper roots. And so, number one in this series is be kind to yourself. Because I think that most people, most of us, especially as women, those of us socialized as women, and so many of the generations before us as well, even when we're processing a bunch of things that we've been seeing, things that we've been hearing, or that we've personally lived and experienced or personally witnessed, maybe that happened, you know, earlier that day or earlier that week, or that you're navigating this year. So many women, what we often do is we just expect ourselves to keep going and keep doing everything the same. Like, no matter if we are navigating something big and challenging and emotional, what so many of us as women do is we expect ourselves to keep doing everything the same. Okay, so this is going to be one of the key takeaways from this episode. And I even invite you to check in right now. If you've been processing, if you've been navigating and coping with what you've been witnessing, seeing, hearing, experiencing, etc., have you expected yourself to just keep doing everything the same? So many of us as women, even when we are processing a lot, as I know is true for many of us, and again, this can be in your life as an individual or in the collective, we expect ourselves to keep doing everything the same as if we were machines. So take a moment, check in. Do I expect myself to keep doing everything the same as if I were a machine? Because we are not machines. I repeat, we are not machines. We are full humans with hearts and brains and nervous systems and bodies that need attention and care. And in certain chapters and seasons of our lives, as most certainly has been true for me in this last year, and I know that this is not just my experience, my individual experience, but it's very much a collective experience, is why I absolutely was like, I need to record this series. And please, by the way, share this episode on Instagram, share it on your socials, text it to a friend if there's someone who you think would, find this super supportive, because this is so needed right now. How we can take care of ourselves when there's so much that we're processing, our brains are processing, that we're then having an emotional response to, and then those emotions need to be processed, and then our nervous system is responding to. And this is all happening on top of our day-to-day responsibilities. So if you ever feel like it's feeling like just too much, be kind to yourself, because we are not machines. Like I said, we are full humans with hearts and brains and nervous systems and bodies that need attention and care. Okay, so now let me share with you, what has being kind to myself looked like this year as I navigate and cope? And remember, coping is not a bad thing. It's not a flaw. It is freaking brilliant, okay? We cope when we need to, but we also get to be intentional about how do we want to cope? What feels most supportive, okay? So what has being kind to myself looked like this year? Here's one example. I'm going to just share with you several examples. First example, in this last year, I have not done nearly as much launching, as we call it in the business world, AKA selling. I have not been doing nearly as much of it as I typically do. I still have supported my clients with the same quality, excellence, and personalized dedication that I always have. That has remained, but I have done way less selling, which means I have written way less emails. I have done way less free workshops and trainings. And as you know, because you're a listener of the podcast, I also took a break from the podcast this summer. And that is a choice that I have intentionally made that has felt so kind. It's a choice that I intentionally have made over the last year to take care of myself and to honor my bandwidth, because my brain is doing all this processing. I'm doing all this emotional processing as well. And there's also nervous system self-care that has also had to take place. That requires bandwidth. And so I've recognized that there's a lot that I'm processing, none of which I asked for, by the way, but navigating it nonetheless, navigating it, processing and coping as needed. And so that's a business example that I can share with you for how I have, just in the most practical sense, been kind to myself, allowing myself to do less. And for any of my business owners out there listening, if this freaks you out, remember, your version of being kind to yourself doesn't have to look like mine. I'll say that again. Your version of being kind to yourself doesn't have to look like mine. But here's a question that you can already start to explore is, what is your version of being kind to yourself when it comes to your business or professional life? So what is your version of being kind to yourself? What would that look like for you? Now you may wonder, well, Brenda, hasn't that affected your bottom line? And to be very honest and just so frank, yes, it has. And that is part of being kind to myself. For me, again, your version of this doesn't have to look like mine, but I am in this series going to be sharing very honestly, just truly sharing the very real human, like what is self-care looked like during these times. Yeah, the answer is yes, of course. But the decision that me and my family have made is, that self-care is super important. And we have adjusted what our finances look like. We haven't made changes as necessary to be able to accommodate for that. So yeah. And I think it's powerful to speak to that because it's can be part of real, life decision making. And I also want to acknowledge that there's definitely a certain level of privilege that I know I have, that I get to run a business from home. I don't have a boss. I am my own boss. So there's a lot of flexibility in my schedule and what my day looks like that not everyone has access to, or that they may not have. But I also, on that note, that is true. And also, I have coached so many business owners and entrepreneurs that sometimes are even harder on themselves than if they had a boss. Meaning, like, they don't give themselves days off. They don't, right? I'm just going to leave it at that. That sometimes are harder on themselves as their own boss than if they had a boss. So, yes, we can acknowledge, and I want to acknowledge that there's some privilege here in my ability to have this flexibility in my schedule and what my day looks like, et cetera. But it also has been a choice that I made very intentionally as a way of being kind to myself and honor my bandwidth. And this is one of the examples of what that has looked like for me in my life. And it's an example of what being kind to myself as an entrepreneur in a way that, like I said, honors my bandwidth, where I'm not expecting myself to run like a machine, even though there's a lot that I know I'm processing as a human. Okay, let me share another example with you. Recently, at the beginning of the summer, back in the beginning of this summer, they found a polyp in my uterus. And so my specialist and we decided to have that removed, and I had surgery and everything turned out great. So don't worry. And side note, I am so thankful for everything that I've learned throughout my journey about the importance of listening to our bodies, by the way. Oh my gosh, but I will have to save that for another episode on another day because that is absolutely its own episode one day. Okay, but back to this. So earlier, beginning of the summer, my specialist and I decided to have the polyp removed. Like I said, everything turned out great, so don't worry. And I just wanted to share a little bit with you because on the day of the surgery, I went to the hospital in my pajamas. I have these super soft, well, I have a few pairs of super soft pajamas that I absolutely love. I went to the hospital in my pajamas. And I planned that day for my spouse to take care of everything related to our daughter. Also, I asked my mom if she could come and spend the day with us, and she made us lunch and dinner. She made super yummy caldito de albóndigas. And so if you've never had albóndigas, oh my gosh, next time you see it on a menu at a Mexican restaurant, it is so delicious. Like my mouth is actually watering right now talking about it. So delicious, especially on a cloudy day or rainy day or like cold, cloudy weather. Yum. It is the best. That is like medicine right there. And for the entire week leading up to the procedure, and then the entire week for those entire 2 weeks, I did not create any content for social media or go on my social media. And so I'm sharing this example with you because being kind to myself looks like a couple different things here. Not expecting myself to do as much as I normally do. And so that literally meant recruiting a couple of people, couple other humans, which of course I'm so thankful to have these supports in my life. But in this example, right, I delegated, I recruited, even though usually, I have to add this in here, even though usually in my family, I am absolutely the one that, like, I'm the oldest daughter of 5, okay? Do I even need to say anything else after that? I'm the oldest daughter of 5. I am usually the one that, like, I'm taking my parents to their appointments. I'm doing this and that. I'm supporting everyone, And so to delegate and recruit and put supports in place for me on that day so that I'm doing less and even resting, like I pretty much slept all day, that was being kind to myself. In this example that I'm sharing with you, being kind to myself looked like asking for help if possible. being kind to myself can even look like just wearing comfy clothes. I showed up to the hospital like hair like all over the place. Okay, maybe it wasn't all over the place, but it's not like my main priority was being comfortable. And so these are just some examples of being kind to myself and what that has looked like. And I think for me, very often, because I most certainly historically have been go-getter, high achiever, blah, 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 all of that. Being kind to myself, I will say, often looks like doing less. Being kind to myself means not treating myself like a machine that is just expected to just keep going at the exact same rate and pace and perform the exact same functions day after day after day after day. And it's interesting, even as I'm hearing myself say that, I'm like, dang, even machines have to be like, well, depending on what the machine or the device is, they may have to be recharged. They may have to be plugged in. They may require, maintenance situation. So even machines need to recharge or need the quote unquote self-care, right? Maintenance, etc. And if you find that as you're listening to me, you're like, oh my gosh, Brenda, I totally treat myself like a machine. I just expect myself to go, 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 go. No matter if I'm dealing with this or that, it's like go, go, go. Expectations remain exactly the same. I want to tell you, you are not alone. You are not alone. I can absolutely relate with that. I mean, this was absolutely me. And not surprisingly, because check this out. Capitalism, patriarchy, colonialism have most certainly taught us to function like machines. They have taught us to function like machines, and that is most certainly not for our benefit. It is for their benefit. So I'm going to say that again. If you find that you're listening to me and you're like, oh my gosh, I totally treat myself like a machine. I expect myself to just literally just go, 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 even if I'm experiencing XYZ and navigating ABC. Capitalism, patriarchy, colonialism have most certainly taught us to function like machines, and most certainly not for our benefit. And so I hope that with me sharing some of these very real life examples, that you're able to connect with, okay, what would this look like for me? What would being kind to myself look like for me? And I will reiterate this one more time because it is freaking so important. I am sharing these examples not for you to compare your experience to mine, but to share. I think it's so important to share during this time and to really connect on a human level, to share and to show how this principle of being kind to ourselves can look like in real life, so that you can apply it to your life, apply it into your life your way as you need it for what you are navigating. Being kind to yourself matters so much in times of injustice. And so as I wrap up this episode, I want to highlight a few key points here for why being kind to yourself matters so much in times of injustice. When the world feels unsafe, our nervous system gets louder. Another way to say that is our nervous system feels activated, and for good reason. When we follow that up with being harsh with ourselves, that only activates your nervous system even more. And by the way, to connect the dots here with any emotional eating, stress eating, sabotage cycles, etc., if you've had any patterns of emotional eating, if the world's already feeling unsafe and your nervous system is already activated, and then you layer on being harsh with yourself on top of that, which then activates your nervous system even more. And we know this is true from studying the brain science, there's literature to support this. If there's been any patterns of then self-comforting with food, well, guess what? Layering being harsh on yourself on top of what you're already experiencing truly doesn't help. It does not help. On the other hand, self-kindness, so being kind to yourself, and compassion, even though these might sound like fluffy kind of woo-woo terms and ideas, being kind to yourself is actually stabilizing. It is actually grounding. What I'm going to tell you right now is supported by science. When you meet yourself with compassion and self-kindness, so being kind to yourself, self-kindness is biomedicine. It is literally biomedicine. Compassion calms the fight or flight alarm when it's been activated. It actually helps to calm that, and it activates your parasympathetic nervous system. Parasympathetic nervous system, that's the technical name, technical way to say this, but this will literally slow your heart rate. You're able to access feeling calm at a body level. Choosing compassion for yourself actually signals safety to your nervous system. Isn't that so beautiful? I mean, it's freaking powerful. I love that so much, that we can signal safety to our nervous system through compassion, and not safety in a way where you're gaslighting yourself. That is clearly not what we're doing in this episode. We are name all the things, like honor what is true for your lived experience right now. We name that, we honor it. It matters. And it's so powerful to understand the role that self-kindness, or being kind to yourself, can play, the role that it can serve, and how it can support you through whatever it is that you're navigating and your experience of the world right now. So here's how I want to wrap up this episode. I want to invite you into your own reflection. I've already teased this question a couple of times throughout this episode, but we're going to ask it one more time. And I want to invite you into your own reflection. What would being kind to yourself look like for you right now? What would being kind to yourself look like for you? What can it look like for you today? What can being kind to yourself look like this week? What can being kind to yourself look like this month or next year? Explore this question, let it swirl around in your mind, and then see what comes up as the answer when you listen. All right, my sister, today was part 1 of this series. In the next episode, we are going to go deeper into emotional self-care and emotional processing specifically. And again, I'll be sharing real episodes of how I have been deepening my own self-care and what that has looked like in the day-to-day, like share some real examples with you. If you loved this episode and just found it so incredibly helpful, I want to invite you to share the episode on your favorite social media platform, and or go and give us a 5-star review. This really helps so that other women can find this support, which is so needed and so important right now. Okay, I'm sending you tons of love, and I'll see you here next week.